All right, we'll call the Governor's UAS Council meeting to order and with a roll call. Butch Huseby.
Present.
Wilson. Jason Jacoby. Dustin Temple. Gordy Kahn.
Here.
James Strait.
Here.
Jason Smith. Jen Fowler.
Here.
Mike Balzaman told me he wasn't going to make it. Paul Sapaniak. I guess I'll Paul in here.
Here.
Steve White. Wes Err. Joe Froelich.
Present.
Thanks, Joe. All right. So just to brief people on the general tasks we've been working on for procurement process updates and reviewing draft. I have nothing new for folks yet. I've not been able to finish getting that draft memo together. For general other general council information, you should have seen several meetings that have been canceled for the remainder of the year. A couple close to holidays and other conflicts. So hopefully everybody got those. I think there's been a few that, as I tried to look ahead through the end of the year. So just make note of that. So hopefully the draft recommendation review will have something to share in the near future. So when we get to that. I did want to touch base on a discussion we had several council meetings ago. We were starting to talk about insurance requirements around the procurement of drones and such. Joe, you had reached out and I think had a discussion with Brett Dahl. Can you just brief the council on what you found out there?
Yeah, sure. My questions to Brett were really basically around what would, for state-owned UASs, what would the state insurance requirements be for having a state contract? Would be for state contractors that have UASs or agencies having their own, and then some of our previous discussions that I recall was, what if a UAS crashed, lost, shot down? What would the insurance cover? So the response that I got back from Brett was quite lengthy, and I'll share this. I don't know if you want me to just put this into the chat, the response that I got, but I can just kind of quickly cover a little bit. He said liability rising from the operation of a UAS is covered through the state's self insurance program under Montana tort claims, and they have a limit of $750,000 per claim, or to 1 million, $1.5 million per occurrence, provided the use falls within the course of employment and is part of the mission of the agency or university. Physical damage is covered, but is optional at discretion of the agency or university. So it sounds like additional insurance would be required there. In order for either the liability or the physical damage, UAS must be reported to Risk Management Tort and Defense, or Montana Tort, I'm sorry, through their contact Virginia, and then she reports the UAS to the Risk Management Tort through their property casualty insurance information system. One thing was that they want, at least Brett Dahl wants to be contacted directly regarding any UAS that the value exceeds $250,000. whereas the use of UAS involves high or unusual risk. He may want to look outside the state's self-insurance program to commercial insurance, so that they can limit the state's property casualty insurance funds exposure. And that was kind of the what I'll do is I'll cut this and paste it into the chat, if that's okay with you, Cray.
You could do
And
that. Maybe what you do is put in just a document and load it to the team site so we can easily find it.
Oh, sure.
If we need to reference it. So if I recall, and I didn't quite catch if you said this or not. So if we procure a drone that falls within, less than $250,000 or something, do we have to? I think the agency has to list that as a vehicle in their policy, but it's automatically covered by the existing policy or something like that.
Yeah, he didn't state that, so I don't know if it needs to be. Let me see here. In order, the UAS must be reported to Risk Management Tort Online by the Department of Administration's insurance contact Virginia Tyan. She'll report the UAS to us online through the state. So you do need to report that, and he gives a link to.
Okay.
Yeah, they must contact their insurance okay, yeah.
Yeah, I had been told in our agency that it was treated just like another vehicle,
Yep.
and that the insurance contract they already have established would cover that. So it sounds like the only exception might be if it's an extenuating mission that has high risk or a very expensive UAV that we should be good to go.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's one of those other two, then contact them about so they can procure maybe more affordable options for the increased amount.
Yeah, that's how I take his interpretation there.
Okay. Any questions about that for folks in the council? So I think that simplifies that for the procurement process. It's not something we have to overly be concerned with. Just agencies need to know to report that for insurance purposes.
Yeah, and I believe you had another question for me this morning about it was a DOA, the right to privacy. And yeah, and I forwarded that on to DOA Legal for an explanation of that can be given back to the council. So, I just requested a response by next Wednesday so I can give a report.
If they can get it that fast, that'd be great.
Mhm.
We'll see. That may take them a little more time. So I was gonna the next item on the agenda was the Montana UAS plan and citizen interaction. And so I was gonna move to that topic if nobody had anything else on the procurement piece or insurance piece. Okay, hearing none. Just a couple notes. So from what happened last week, we did have a meeting on Thursday. Several of you attended. Thank you for those that helped participate on that discussion. DEQ did upload a form to the team site. It's basically a form used for landowner property entry for some of their mine mitigations and such. It's worded more for the potential physical entry, but it also would cover flying over the property. One of the discussions we really had, and I'll bring a document up on, I'll bring the notes basically actually up onto the screen here. Let me just start a share here on this. All right. right, here we go. All right, hopefully folks can see that, or at least those of you that have a screen in front of you on the call. The recommended guidance on state agency of UAS over private property. So basically we had four areas from the executive order we have to address. Citizen interaction, recommended guidance on state agency use of UAS over private property, citizens' right to privacy, intentional or unintentional collection, handling, dissemination of personal information, developing a process and or systems for UAS data requests by others, ideally citizens, and develop a process and or systems for citizen complaints, comments, or concerns. So we had some discussion on this, and I'll just kind of report and brief everyone on what we covered there. We had a discussion again about the FAA assertion that they own control over all airspace. And Steve is gonna try to do some research and pull together the language. Actually, he believes that may come from a Civil Air Act that was passed several decades ago. So following the FAA requirements is what's required for UAS use over private property, because private property boundaries do not extend up into airspace. And he's going to do a little more research along some things on that, and how things like national parks and wilderness areas got excluded because there must have been something put in place for those things. And so then the question we have, and Joe, what I sent to you for DOA was, is there anything else that gives legal grounds of private property restrictions, especially here in Montana? The recommended guidance for state agencies, and how do we give guidance for that as part of our plan? And some agencies already have a internal requirement that they have to obtain landowner permission in order to fly over their property. But based on FAA regulations and the lack of any other type of statute that gives that requirement, are we giving away are we creating a need for permission when permission is not the correct term? And so one of the topics in the conversation was an attempt should be made to notify property owners trying to fly over their private property, because it's not really permission, because they actually don't have a right to grant permission to. If a landowner objects to the flying over their private property, then each agency needs to determine the best course of action. And so, for example, if it was an emergency situation, they may not have even been able to give notification to the property owner. But if they were able to, and it was still an emergency situation, that they may determine that they still need to proceed with such a flight, or they may determine that something else can accomplish the same purpose without the flight, or in a different way, even though it might be more costly and less cost effective. And so that might be preferred to maintain better citizen relations than to proceed with such a flight. There was also discussion on not harassing livestock or wildlife, or posing any undue risk or impact upon landowner operations. So, if the landowner has an active branding going on, for example, on their property, and people are out there moving cattle around, that might not be a good time to be conducting that flight. Incorporating some language from restrictions from Part 107, Section 205 into our plan portion of that area of our recommendation. So that was kind of the draft discussion on that. Then we moved into citizens' right to privacy and intentional and unintentional collection, handling, dissemination of personal information. The right to privacy, and where do they apply, public space versus private land, and what constitutes imagery PII, and how anonymized do we need to scrub our data, and determining, if you're obtaining data area from public areas and right of ways, is generally accepted as inadvertent acquisition of the information, similar to taking a photo of the sunset from the edge of the highway across someone's farm or yard. It's not determined that you've invaded their privacy in that sense. So I wanted to flip to another document that I've obtained internally and share the information I've gained there, and then talk a little bit about where we can have a little discussion on where we're headed here and the request of DOA. So I'm going to actually jump to this here. So I posed a question to our internal legal team. They came back because we had this discussion coming up last year with the Lump Gulch fire, and they DNRC wanted to do some injury collection on the Lump Gulch fire for determining where to put fire break and fire line actions to mitigate the spread of that fire and to protect homes on the areas of land that were under DNRC protection. And they wanted to make sure that they were had followed all our due process and our internal process in that behavior. And this issue a bit came up with privacy. So one of our attorneys did a kind of a deeper dive into the legal review on things. And really the issue seeming to come up, we don't have a lot in statute. We've already been talking about section, is it 45.223 or whatever, 45.5.223, that basically restricts surreptitious surveillance, where you're actually, like trying to spy in on someone's window or something and monitor them. But there wasn't a lot else in statute that really talks about right to privacy of citizens. And what our attorney came up with was one of the big things coming up. It's actually from the Montana Constitution. I think I've got it shared here on the screen. It's from Article 2, Section 10. The right of individual privacy is essential to the well-being of a free society and shall not be infringed without the showing of a compelling state interest. And they've had several court cases that have further defined that constitutional right to privacy. And so they said the Supreme Court basically has whether a constitutionally protected privacy interest exists. The state Supreme Court applies a two-part test: whether the person involved had a subjective or actual expectation of privacy, and whether society is willing to recognize that expectation as reasonable. Now, for the council, that probably doesn't help us a whole lot. For DNRC, what they have chosen to do. Well, let me just stop right there and see if anybody else has any other insights or comments along those lines and what I've shared here.
I don't. I mean, I guess my comments are is that there is certain areas that are defined within MCA that defines PII, but it's really more for an information system. So yeah, I think that this is kind of one of those gray areas. And I'm going to share this document with the DOA legal counsel, if that's okay, Craig. And just kind of highlight this area here for what it is. I sent him an email earlier, but this speaks a little bit closer, I think, than what my questions were asked. So
sure, yeah, and so the other sorry, I just lost track because I'm trying to share something else here at the same time. Oh, for PI. So the other question and I think I worded it this way when I sent it to you, Joe, to ask DOA's legal. So what I wanted to do was get more than just DNRC's legal team responding to this topic of right of privacy. So DOA is obviously a big one. We might be able to get some help from the governor's office legal team and any other agency that's currently utilizing these things. You know, I know, James, it seems like DEQ's been already having developed a lot of these things around this, and Mike's not on the call, but I think the MDT probably has in some way. Has their legal team done a bit of a research on the privacy rights of citizens and what the operations and how they impact that? And so you guys are using that basically a right to entry form, which you probably had developed before UAVs came about, and are just extending that to UAVs. But any other legal opinions or guidance or insights into anything that they've found and what is guiding your operations would be helpful for us as a council as we try to take these different legal opinions and formulate that into a recommendation. I think would be helpful in this sense. And I'm sorry, where I was starting to go with that was a question that I had Joe ask his DOA is basically if we get an imagery from a UAV flight of a person in a yard and you can identify that yard as 325 Maple Street, have we identified a person as PII is likely that is Julie Joe at 325 Maple Street or not because it's not identifiable or such. What constitutes PII in imagery? How much, if you can recognize a person and recognize a place, is that a PII information that a person was at a particular place at potentially a particular time of when the imagery was obtained? If not, it probably alleviates a lot of burden and concern that we would have. One of the things that DNRC's legal, in their review, came back with a bit of, let's see here if I can just grab those notes again. That the thought that if someone was in a plane and they're flying over a place and you see a person out in a yard, that is not it's too trivial to consider that as a invasion of right to privacy in that particular case. And so with imagery with a drone, it may come down to the types of things like resolution and such. So for our agency, just for the council's knowledge of how they're handling this, I'm going to switch over. Can you see this screen, NWCG standards? Somebody?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Doing a lot of talking, getting a lot of silence. Just making sure I'm not talking to myself here. So our agency basically said, look, and one of our first internal units really wanting to get into this was our fire team, wildland firefighting team. And so they basically came up that for DNRC will in general follow the National Wildfire Coordinating Group standards for fire unmanned UAS system operations. And in here, it kind of talks a bit about with mission planning that that as part of a plan for a mission, it should be determined, along with the intent of the mission and the data being collected, that how any PII that may be collected will be handled, specifying any retention policies, either masking the post-production demo processing or limiting the resolution of it or other camera settings, and basically saying, look, as part of your mission planning, if you think you're going to be collecting PII and you can mitigate that with how you collect your imagery, a higher altitude, lower resolution, then that would be great so that you don't collect it in the first place. If we do end up collecting it, either inadvertently because it was in the presence of the mission or something along those lines, then what are the processes we might take to then either blur that particular piece of imagery if it is of concern or determine that it's not of concern, that it's incidental and it is not an invasion of that right to privacy. But it really comes down in many ways to, in the Constitution, what is that right to privacy and the expectation of that citizens should have in relation to our UAS operations. And that's where I really would like more legal people to kind of weigh in for this type of operation. What is the citizens expectation of reasonable expectation of what the privacy is and what a violation of privacy is, to determine and make sure that we're not violating the Constitution based on our operations and how we do that. And in many ways for agencies, I believe it's going to be having a actual mission. What's the word I want for a mission operation? Not a mandate. Jen, help me out here. What is a manifesto type of thing for a particular mission that you're stating what the purpose of the mission is, why you're collecting it, where you're collecting it, and maybe even have some kind of disclaimer phrase in there that a collection of any personally identifiable information is incidental and unintended as part of this mission, just to help alleviate the intent, because it, from the Constitution and a couple of the court cases that have come up, it with Section 10, it is that the right to that privacy shall not be infringed without the showing of compelling state interest, and so that the state is not intentionally trying to collect that information, that we're not actually trying to be monitoring people's privacy in that sense. Gordy, you know, thinking of you and your agency where you actually are taking pictures of people's homes and whatnot, that's probably something that essentially would have to be very well defined, so that this is part of the mission. We are here to assess property values, and we're not monitoring people and their activities. Any monitoring of people and their activities on their property is incidental to the purpose of trying to obtain property values. And maybe you guys try to mitigate that by not doing flights if people are around, which also helps reduce risk. You'll come back another time when there's nobody present, or at least you know, people are indoors or something like that. I don't know, but it's something to think about for departments that have to walk a little closer to that line.
Definitely.
You know, Cray, I just, you know, one of the things I think you can maybe bring up on the screen, but I under computer security breach, and it talks about, you know, PII there under MCA 30-14 1704. And maybe you've addressed that here. But this would be something that I'd be curious to see what
30 what?
30-14 and 1704. And so here talks about PII. You know, you know, under that section B, and it talks about the you know, first name, last name, and the combination that you have to have for PII. But up above, under computer security breach, any person or business that conducts business that owns computer and shall be disclosed. So having DOA or DNRC define what that PII is, and I know there's multiple sections around in MCA that kind of defines PII. There's another definitions area that I'm aware of, and I'll find that and send it to you. But I think, you know, on that first sentence there includes owns or licensed computerized data that includes personal information shall disclose any breach. So it talks about there if it's unencrypted, and so that could be, you know, part of that procurement piece of those devices being encrypted, and I don't know. I would be curious to see what Dawn has to say about this and tying it back to the document that you talked about the personal PII. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. I really don't know how it would go trying to encrypt imagery data. I'm not aware of anyone that's tried to do that, if that's easy to do or if that really encumbers. I mean, the data is already very difficult to process in any timely fashion. If you're able to encrypt it without corrupting it, that might also be very inhibitive to operations if you have other means of securing that information when the data is at rest. But then again, it comes down to what is PII and imagery, right? And that's part of my question.
Yeah.
Because if a person's name, or that it would be their ID and their address, if that together I don't think is PII. But
but would a geocode location or GPS location coordinates be enough to be a PII to say that this is now an address? This is we're using cadastral information, whatever. I don't know, but I do know that a lot of devices nowadays, especially laptops and most hard drives come encrypted, and so that would be just I don't think it would, for any UAS as it's recording video. I don't know. I mean, this is, I guess, back to the group. Is most of these UASs, when they're purchased, do they have a encrypted hard drives? I don't know that answer. But if it did, it would meet this requirement that it was these, as of if it gets lost or someone steals it. And if they say yes, it's it flew over this one house, and by GPS coordinates that is PII to that location. If it was encrypted, then they would not be able to use that data, and it would be, I believe, covered under this. So that's just my take.
Also,
Would
the
the
device.
coordinates be in the machine?
What was that?
Would the coordinates or any of that data actually be on the device, or would that be in a different system that gets married up later?
I'll jump in. The coordinates they are on the device, and often much of the information stored on SD cards. They aren't necessarily encrypted.
You say they are?
They are not.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's not so much they have hard drives; it's transient data storage until you get into that place of rest. I'm not sure, Joe, it's realistic to have that data be encrypted from the moment it's collected through the stream. I'm not sure the technology exists to adequately do that at this point.
And that data is already available on the internet, so I don't know.
Well, that's part of the question is it even, considered PII? Looking at this definition, it's a combination of a person's name along with other information. Address, I don't think, is one of them because that's public information already. But as identifying a person in a particular place at a particular time, because you have a timestamp on your imagery, the imagery shows a location, and if you can identify a person, is that privacy or PII? And Google has treated it as kind of yes, so they blur the faces, but based on definition, is that really? Because if I see you downtown at 2:00 at the grocery store, then I've identified you at a particular place and particular time. Did I just view your PII? Well, no. That's public knowledge because you're out and about in public. So the fact that we capture that information, does it become PII in that sense? That's where I want legal to tell us. But I would think that we're starting to stretch it if you're going to that. It become more of like with Department of Revenues, if you're doing a property assessment, now you're invading an area that people feel more protected about. And although you have the right for assessments and such, but any other information you gather to make sure you don't collect something that might be considered PII would be something I think you'd be pretty interested in knowing. Well, that's a good to remind that definition as well, Joe. I think I'll throw that in the notes if I can remember to do that here. And part of the concern, the reason I ask all these questions is because this particular piece of Montana's code was written with the thought of typical data, right, in our system, spreadsheet data, database data. I don't think this language was crafted with the idea of imagery or other types of remotely sensed information in mind. And so making sure that we have proper considerations of that stuff and know what constitutes what PII and imagery is, and where that protection might exist that we have to be careful of, or where it doesn't exist that we don't have to be careful of. And that's where, again, it'd be good to have legal weigh in, especially since it's in our Constitution that citizens have a right of privacy. Then it becomes pretty essential for us to make sure that we have an understanding of what that expectation is and what our operations are that don't violate that, or at least a recommendation for agencies on how to minimize the potential that they would violate that. So if anybody else wants to reach out to their legal, I'm more than happy to entertain other people's thoughts on this, because one of your departments may have had to handle this in a case that brought it to their attention. You know, maybe even you at the university, Jen. I don't know if you guys have had to handle any of those things, but if you guys have already chewed through this process, that information would be helpful. So.
We're still working through same issues here. And we did start down the path of developing a way to kind of smooth out faces or blur out faces and imagery, especially when we're on campus.
Yeah, I would think there might be some student laws that also apply there too that you have to wade through as well, I imagine. So. So that was kind of a lot of the discussion that we had in the work group meeting. We didn't really get to the last two bullets in the executive order that we're charged with: developing a process or systems for UAS data requests and for citizen complaints. I do have brief notes here I threw on here because I think in large part recommending a website or application built to handle data requests, and we had a note for a legal disclaimer for use of the data, and then some type of process by which someone can submit a complaint for review and it get routed to the appropriate agency that may have been conducting the mission in that location at that time, be developed. And I think a web system application could probably fairly readily handle those needs without a whole lot of effort from the council to describe what that is, other than that would be the path that needs to be recommended, and somebody needs to do that. Any other thoughts or questions on this topic for discussion today? All righty. So that's pretty much all I had. Is there any other council discussion that we want to talk about or bring up for future meetings? All right. I guess then I'll just we'll work towards a close here. I don't see any members of the public present, but I'll just ask: is there any public comment or someone would like to make as a citizen? All righty. Hearing none, then if there's no objections, we will call the council meeting to a close and reconvene at the next scheduled meeting.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a good day.